Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Let's talk about it. So Black Panther Wakanda Forever is of course directed by none other than Mr. Ryan Coogler, who directed the first movie back in 2018. And many of you guys will know that this is my most highly anticipated film of all of 2022. Like truly, this was the one that I was the most excited to see. But as excited as I was to finally get a chance to see the follow-up to the 2018 smash hit, I was also super anxious and super nervous, guys, because Ryan Coogler had a huge task ahead of him. Not only did he have to produce a follow-up to the 2018 movie, which ended up being one of Marvel's most successful films, and also the very most successful Black-led movie that Hollywood has ever produced, literally in history, right? So that's already a tall order. Then unfortunately he had the added pressure of having to produce this sequel without his lead because of the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman, who portrayed T'Challa, aka Black Panther. And the pressure only built up over time as we started to see the development of the recast T'Challa movement, where a lot of fans felt that instead of killing off the character of T'Challa, aka Black Panther, within the universe, they could just recast him with another actor. But others, myself included, felt like Ryan Coogler had made the right decision in not recasting T'Challa and instead respecting his legacy and his portrayal of this now iconic character. So yeah, I was super nervous, okay, because this film was thrown a bunch of hurdles before even a single shot was filmed. But I am so happy to be sitting here today ready to report to you guys that Ryan Coogler absolutely pulled it off. He knocked it out of the park and gave us a worthy sequel to a now iconic film. So I'm going to be diving into my thoughts on Black Panther Wakanda Forever in depth, as I am wont to do. But before we get into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. Make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next, and be sure to give this video a like if you enjoy my reviews. It really helps the channel out and it lets me know what you like to see from me. Now without further ado, guys, I have so much to talk about. Grab yourself a drink, okay, get yourself nice and comfortable, because we are going to be diving into my thoughts, my long ass thoughts on this movie. Okay, so before we get into the nitty gritty of each of the, plot points and character arcs, I did just want to give you guys my overall thoughts on the film itself and the cinema going experience. And the first thing that came to mind was just how happy and relieved I was to be sitting down in the cinema and watching a truly cinema-worthy experience. I thought this film was incredibly cinematic. Okay, I felt like Ryan Coogler and the whole cast and crew, these experts in their field, came together and poured their whole heart and expertise and knowledge and imagination into this film, and I could feel it in every single frame. And this was the perfect time to give us such an experience, especially in light of the direction that Phase 4 has been going in as of yet. Many of you guys may have seen my problems with Phase 4 of the MCU video. I mentioned that one of the issues that I had with this phase of the franchise was that a lot of these projects were feeling less than cinematic. A lot of them felt like they were being produced on a conveyor belt and they had lost that special spark that we had seen in previous phases. Here, we definitely get a return to that. We definitely get a return to that cinematic quality. Like I said, you could feel the attention to detail from each individual on the cast and crew, whether it be the cinematography, the music, the costume design, the production design, hair, makeup, everyone was giving it their all, and all under the guidance and vision of Ryan Coogler, the director and writer of the film. Just to highlight a couple of technical elements of the movie, you have the return of Mr. Ludwig Göransson, who does the score for this film just as he did for the first movie and actually won an Academy Award for doing so. And here he incorporates the now iconic musical cues, the Wakandan musical cues that we know, into this new score, but kind of giving it an evolution to really make it distinct from the score of the original film. I think he's less of a guaranteed nominee for the Academy Award this time around, simply because he's building off of what he accomplished in the first movie. But the work that he did in the first film was just so incredible. It was a great foundation for the score of this new movie. A lot of you guys already know how much of a fan I am of Ludwig Göransson. I think the man is a genius. Between his work with previous Ryan Coogler movies, including the Black Panther films, and also producing the scores for the Mandalorian, okay, and Boba Fett, I just think the guy is on his way to becoming as much of a legend as John Williams. And then when it comes to the costumes, you have once again the return of Ruth Carter, who won an Academy Award for her work on the first movie. But here she's back with her trademark mix of regal African traditional dress with youthful and innovative Afrocentric styles. Oh my goodness, the costumes in this film are out of this damn world. But not only that, because she's not only dressing the Wakandans in this film, she also had to dress the sea dwellers of Talokan. And so she has created a very custom, otherworldly look for them, which I think contrasted beautifully against the warmth of the Wakandans that we've come to know, and created a whole different aesthetic for this different world under the sea. I think Ruth Carter did an incredible job, once again, as we can expect, truly, because she's so iconic and so talented. But again, it's just another example of someone who clearly just poured out their heart and soul into their work on this film. And as I said before, all of these different elements came together to create this spectacular and memorable cinema going experience, where you had members of the audience laughing, crying, oh my god, sobbing, not even crying, sobbing, myself included, we'll talk about it in a second. And then you had the expected oohs and ahs of a great Marvel movie, and then in the end it all wrapped up with this like round of applause, and it just felt like such an amazing communal experience in the cinema, the likes of which we haven't seen since, well, actually since No Way Home last year, but before that, since Avengers Endgame for sure. Now, as I just said, there were many tears shed during this film as it dealt with the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman and therefore T'Challa himself. And as many have said before me, this film ended up being such a beautiful, meaningful, heartfelt tribute to the actor and also to the character. I thought the way that they handled his death was just incredible. Like I said before, Ryan Coogler had an impossible task ahead of him. This has literally never happened before. The lead of an incredibly successful franchise has never died prematurely like this before. And so there was no precedent for it. You know, whatever he decided to do, it would cause some kind of controversy and some people would disagree with that decision. But his decision to not recast T'Challa, I felt, was coming from a place of love and admiration for Chadwick Boseman as an actor and, you know, perhaps as a friend. You could tell that all of the scenes that dealt with T'Challa's passing were a really heartfelt tribute to the actor himself, and you could see that they had poured in all of the love, all of the care. You could see it from the directing, you could see it from the production design, please, from the music, all of these elements, like I said, but of course from the performances on screen as well. You could see that every single person on screen shedding a tear, saying those words filled with emotion, they were really going through that loss. They were really experiencing that loss and trying to channel it into their performance, and it just made it feel so much more real. Like tearing up now again. I was crying the whole time. I just going listen, I could talk about the cinematography of this film, but keep in mind that I was watching it through a veil of tears. So another way that Ryan Coogler decided to pay tribute to Chadwick Boseman within the story of this film was the development that T'Challa ended up dying of a disease. He didn't die in battle, as I would have predicted the case to be. Instead, it was an illness that Shuri believes she could have cured if they'd still had access to the heart-shaped herb. And this is such a clever way of connecting the events that took place in the first film, with Killmonger destroying the rest of the heart-shaped herb to ensure that there would be no more Black Panthers, having that connection from that first film to here, where you have T'Challa have this illness that Shuri thinks, you know, would have been cured by the plant, I think is so clever. And at the same time, it inextricably links the character of T'Challa with Chadwick Boseman, the actor who portrayed him, in a way in direct defiance with the recast T'Challa movement. And the writing here is so strong that this also effortlessly bleeds into the B storyline, where the fact that there's no longer a Black Panther in Wakanda, they no longer have their great protector, has drawn the attention of, you know, international powers who now know about the power and technology and resources on Wakanda and are looking to get a piece of it themselves. And so you have these international powers like France and the usual suspects, okay? France, probably the UK, definitely America, who all have a laser focus towards getting their hands on some vibranium, which Wakanda insists it will not trade because these lot can't be trusted. Just look at the history. Just look at the history books. Look at the material. The scene in the UN that we got at the beginning of the film was just fantastic. It illustrated this perfectly. The hypocrisy of these international powers, the fact that they're saying one thing, but deep down they know exactly what they're after, and it is of course the vibranium. It is of course the opportunity to create even more powerful weapons and increase their standing on the global stage. And you see that the second that the Dora Milaje barge in and they're dragging along some French special ops soldiers, they force them to kneel in front of them, just showing the world the hypocrisy of, like I said, a nation like France saying one thing and doing another. Now, this storyline that explored these international powers that were coveting vibranium, wanting to use it for their own nefarious means, definitely reminded me of another recent superhero movie that I reviewed on my channel, and that was Black Adam. You know, I mentioned in my review that I really appreciated the inclusion of the exploration of a country, a fictional country, mind you, that has a precious resource that is coveted by powerful nations for all the wrong reasons. As I mentioned in that review, the exploitation of precious minerals and resources is definitely a topic that is close to home for me, because I am from the Democratic Republic of Congo, a country that is full of incredibly important natural resources that are constantly exploited for the sake of profits, you know, across the world that do not benefit the Congolese people whatsoever. This is very political, but it ties in directly to what we see here in Black Adam and in fact in Black Panther 2. In the case of Black Adam though, I did mention that I wish the script had gone further delving into this side of the story as opposed to just commenting on it, which was appreciated, but still it left me wanting more. But as I mentioned, when it comes to Black Panther 2, the script is so well written that each of these elements are embedded within the story and are part of the overall picture here. The geopolitics of Wakanda have always been an intrinsic part of this franchise, and that is no accident because Ryan Coogler has a far more political mind and he's very savvy in the way that he's able to incorporate it in this storyline. And yet another example of just how cleverly this script is written is the fact that Ryan Coogler uses the exploration of the exploitation of resources to introduce us to Namor and the sea dwellers of Talokan. Because yeah, it turns out that Wakanda is not the only nation that has access to vibranium on the planet, but there is in fact a whole ass kingdom under the sea okay, under the sea, and they have access to vibranium along the, I think the seabed, I think that's where the meteorite was, and they've built an entire kingdom, an entire society based off of the properties of this extremely precious metal. And this essentially makes Talokan the underwater equivalent of Wakanda, and the people of Talokan are led by Namor, their king, who actually they consider as a god. Now, Namor has a vendetta against the surface world because of the ill treatment of the Spanish conquistadors towards his native peoples, the Mayans. It turns out that Namor has been around for a long time. Namor has been around for hundreds of years due to his mother having consumed their version of the heart-shaped herb, which grew on a vibranium-rich soil. And as a result of that, he was born with an elongated lifespan. And he was also a mutant to begin with, as it's revealed in this film, and that's very much in line with the comics, unlike the revelation that we saw in Miss Marvel. But yes, Namor is born a very special kid who develops a huge vendetta against the surface world because of the Spanish conquistadors. Now, Namor has been leading the people of Talokan for many, many years in perfect peace and harmony. But it was only when T'Challa went to the UN and opened up the borders to Wakanda, opened up communications with other countries, therefore revealing how advanced the country was, and it was all because of the vibranium that they had, that's when the problem started. Okay, that's when Namor got the biggest headache in the world. As I said, the second that countries like America heard about this vibranium, okay, they went looking for it, and unfortunately they stumbled across a source that was very far away from Wakanda and actually delving into Namor's land, and that's when the problem starts, you see. Okay, he's like, God damn it, T'Challa, did you have to tell them the secret? Now, at first, Namor does explore an alliance with the Wakandans. He says, listen, we've both got vibranium. Okay, we're both very advanced. We can take them. Like, before they come for us, why don't we come for them? But that's not how the Wakandans do things, you see. It's giving very villain. It's giving very bad guy. So the Wakandans are like, no. And then Namor's like, well, at least we could kill the scientist that produced the machine that could detect the vibranium. And the Wakandans are like, maybe, but then they see that the scientist is a young black girl and they're like, no. And that of course makes Namor very angry, and someone who could have been a potential ally to the Wakandans becomes an enemy. Now, before we get to the consequences of this, let's rewind a little bit, because I did just want to explore just how clever this is. I really want to read between the lines here, because with the first film, Ryan Coogler gave us Wakanda, the city on the hill for black people everywhere across the entire diaspora. This is a place that is aspirational, it's Afrofuturistic, and it's hopeful for a lot of black people in this world. Even though it is a fictional country in Africa, we can imagine what Africa could be if there's, you know, equality and if there's lack of governmental interference by international powers. We'll talk about it in a second. It's a place of hope and inspiration that Ryan Coogler was able to manifest so beautifully in the first film. And with this sequel, Ryan Coogler has done the exact same thing for the South American community by rooting Talokan in Mayan culture and Mayan history. And this is significant, of course, because both continents are populated by indigenous peoples who have suffered greatly for 500 plus years at the hands of European colonizers. The fact that Ryan Coogler has drawn the comparison between Talokan and Wakanda in this way, it feels like he's created these beautiful worlds, you know, these cities on a hill for communities that have traditionally been oppressed by European powers. But not only does this stem back to hundreds of years of European imperialism, Ryan Coogler has drawn a direct link between that era of colonization and oppression with the new era, okay, the neo-colonization that we see conducted by who? The Americans, by the American imperial powers who constantly politically destabilize entire nations, particularly within the continent of Africa and South America. And so of course it makes sense when you see the scenes of the Wakandans fighting against the people of Talokan being juxtaposed against these boardroom meetings of CIA agents ruminating on how best to politically destabilize Wakanda in the same way that they have done to many other nations within Africa and South America. And also, if you really want to dig deep, like, let's talk about it since we're already here, the fact that you do have that juxtaposition between the CIA boardroom meetings and the, you know, conflicts, the battles between Wakanda and Talokan, does that not give you a sense of maybe the idea that whilst the Americans are best plotting on how to, you know, assert control over these developing nations, they're infighting with each other, right? Like they don't have their eye on the prize because they're busy fighting with each other, and it therefore only strengthens America's position, which is usually their tactic for destabilization to begin with. But they didn't even have to impose this on the Wakandans and the Talokans this time around. Like, isn't that an interesting development in the plot? It's just so clever to me to see how the geopolitics of these fictional nations perfectly encapsulates what happens in the real world. And speaking of Namor, let's talk about the character himself. I think that Talokan did an incredible job in this role. Truly one of the best characters to be introduced in Phase 4 of the MCU. Easily, without question. Talokan was able to brilliantly balance the humanity within this character and the great leader that he made to his people with the viciousness that he was also capable of, the power that he had, especially in the sequences where he was fighting against the Wakandans. The balance of those characteristics is what made him such a great anti-hero for this film. He was such a charismatic leader, but he was treated with such respect and regality in a similar way to how T'Challa had been treated in the first movie. You know, he wasn't a very jokey character. He had like one joke. He had like one snide comment of a joke, but other than that, he was very serious, very somber and consistent throughout, and meticulous in his planning. At the end of the day, when he surrenders to the Wakandans, at first you're like, oh, like he could have won this if he stuck it out for like 5 more minutes, right? At first you're like, is that a bit convenient? What's going on here? But then later on, he explains his tactic to Namor, and he says, listen, it's best to have the Wakandans as an ally as opposed to an enemy, especially at a time when they have no allies. Now, if I did have one little qualm with the character, it would be that he did feel quite familiar to me, and that's because a lot of his motives do very much resemble that of Killmonger's, right? Except for the very different backstory, of course. But his backstory is key in distinguishing him from Eric Killmonger and indeed any other Marvel character, especially because he is one of the very few Latin American Marvel characters that we've gotten. And when it comes to the underwater kingdom of Talokan, you know, South America's city on a hill, at least within this franchise, I think that the special effects team did a great job realizing this underwater vibranium powered El Dorado. Having said that though, in light of the fact that underwater worlds have become incredibly popular in the last few years, with the first Aquaman movie and the second one coming up, you also of course have the sequel to Avatar and the upcoming live action Little Mermaid, I would say that in comparison to James Wan's Atlantis, Talokan falls a little bit short of the imagination and beautiful, gorgeous, mind-blowing visuals that James Wan incorporated into his underwater world. Now, next up, it's time for us to talk about the star of the hour, and that was of course Princess Shuri, aka the new Black Panther. Now, we all fell in love with Princess Shuri in the first Black Panther movie when she debuted as this fun, lovable, jokey, joyful character that perfectly counterbalanced against T'Challa's more serious and regal personality. That sibling dynamic in the first film was just so beautiful. The actors had an incredible chemistry together and it just felt so authentic. But unfortunately, we lost that dynamic, of course, in the sequel. And with that loss, we saw Shuri go through a huge personality change. As M'Baku says in the film, the character has been forced to grow up quickly as a result of the onslaught of loss that she's had to experience. Now, what I most appreciate when it comes to Shuri's storyline in this film is the clear emotional and character arc that the character goes through. This is something that is becoming increasingly rare in our Marvel heroes, especially the heroes that appear on the big screen where there's less time to dive into their psyche and inner thoughts and feelings. We saw it earlier this year with characters like Thor and Doctor Strange, for instance, who didn't really seem to do much evolving during their movies. But here, Shuri clearly changes into a completely different character as a result of what's happened to her. She is not the same princess that we came to know and love from the first movie. She's actually been affected by the changes in her life. And I just think, one, that's good writing, as I keep saying. Ryan Coogler wrote the hell out of this. But two, it's just so refreshing, like I said, in a landscape of heroes who just seem so, you know, untouched and unaffected by their surroundings in some of these films. Now, as I said before, Shuri was already beating herself up earlier on in the film after the death of her brother. He died due to an illness which she believed she could have cured had she had access to the heart-shaped herb which Killmonger eradicated from the country. But later on in the film, we have that scene where Shuri re-enters the lab and we see how it's just become so abandoned with all of these, you know, rotting plants in the background, showing just how often she tried to find a solution, to find a way to recreate the heart-shaped herb. But we see her return with a new defiance, you know, a new sparkle in her eye as she realizes that she can use some of the fibers from Namor's mother's bracelet in order to synthetically reproduce the plant. And with the return of the plant comes, of course, the return of the Black Panther herself. That whole sequence was done spectacularly well, not only because we lost a lot of the pomp and circumstance that we saw in the first Black Panther movie, reflecting the stark differences in the circumstances surrounding Shuri's adoption of the mantle. Not only do we have that, but we also have the incredible sequence that takes place in the ancestral plane where she expects to see her recently deceased mother. She expects to get words of guidance and support from her mother in the ancestral plane, and instead she comes face to face with who? Killmonger. Guys, guys, follow me along this journey for a second here, because this is just so brilliant. Like I said, we have a character who has changed so drastically as a result of the loss and pain that she has felt over the years. She lost her father. That was already bad enough, but she was managing because she had her brother, because she had her mother, she had the rest of her family. But then they were gone too. This girl is on her own, and so her thoughts go to dark places. Her soul is no longer as pure as it was before. And so instead of meeting with an angel in the ancestral plane, she comes face to face with the devil himself. How freaking amazing! This was such a clever twist to throw onto the character. The idea that she has to come to terms with the fact that she is becoming more like Killmonger. She is being led and controlled and consumed by the same sense of anger and vengeance that he had in the first film. And so instead of seeing her pure, warm-hearted and kind mother, her mother who sacrificed herself to save a stranger, to save a foreigner from Namor, instead of seeing her in the afterlife, she sees him. Ugh, I don't listen. And so you see that when Shuri adopts the mantle of Black Panther, she becomes a hybrid of both T'Challa and Killmonger, and this is reflected in the presence of both silver and gold in her suit. Wow. Chef's kiss, hats off, pat on the back, round of applause. And this was so well foreshadowed. The fact that Shuri refused to come to terms with the loss of her brother and subsequently her mother. She just dove into her work, you know, her technology, refusing to engage in tradition, you know, the idea that she was supposed to burn her ceremonial garbs to mark the end of her mourning. She didn't want to do any of that, and that was a sign that she was letting that pain and that anger fester inside of her. And so of course it resulted in her not meeting her mother in the afterlife, and instead of seeking, you know, justice and cooperation, she sought vengeance. But in the end, good did prevail after she saw her mother, you know, Mufasa style. And she stopped herself from killing Namor and crossing that line to fully becoming Killmonger. Now quickly, since we're on the topic of that action sequence, I will say that I did find find it a little bit wobbly. I do think that it was an improvement on the action sequence of the first film, where we had one Black Panther fighting against another, which is a classic, you know, Marvel style battle royale. Here they do something different, with of course Namor having an entirely different power set, because he is a mutant and immortal and all of that. So that brought some interest, some flavor. We also had the Wakandans fighting on a boat this time around instead of on their own turf. It was like the Wakandan Navy and they were fighting against the people of Talokan, who had different power sets as well, like being able to hypnotize their enemies so they can commit suicide. What's up with that? Can we talk about that for a second? That was wild. That was absolutely wild. Okay, but yeah, that made for a very different dynamic in the action scene. And of course you had the introduction of the Midnight Angels, which were Okoye and Aneka, who's portrayed by Michaela Cole. There wasn't enough Michaela Cole in this film, by the way. Don't think I didn't notice Disney, Marvel, okay? So yeah, it definitely made for a different dynamic, you know, the fact that you did have these water-based villains. But still, overall, I do think that Marvel needs to work on that third act situation, and I think that Black Panther is still a victim of that, even though they did try their best to improve upon what they did for the first movie. And a side note to my side note, you know, speaking of the first movie, I got so annoyed at people who tried to say that the first Black Panther movie was awful, trash, terrible, overrated, based off of the third act alone. I had no time in my schedule, I had no time in my life for people who kept saying that. That pissed me off. That pissed me the hell off. It was just a bit sus to me how these people were able to disregard the 2/3 of the film that were near perfect and establish something historically relevant in cinema, and instead they just chose to focus on the wobbly CGI of the third act. Like, that didn't sit right with me at all. But in the case of the sequel, I would still say that this issue hasn't yet been resolved. But anyways, back to Shuri. I just have to say that, listen, Letitia Wright did what needed to be done. Letitia Wright did the actoring. The actor. You know, the whole range of emotions that I just went through in this explanation? Yeah, she portrayed that on her face. She portrayed that with her acting. It was astounding. She knocked it out of the park. And I personally, I know that there are some haters out there. I just want to drown them out. I personally would love to see more of Shuri's Black Panther. I really, really would. I feel like the way that the film is set up, there is plenty of space for a third movie to complete a trilogy, because the fact that there wasn't any confrontation with the Americans, like, that felt like something that should have been in this film, but it wasn't. So maybe we'll see a follow-up in a third Black Panther movie. And since that movie hopefully won't be taking place in like 10 years when certain character grows up, hopefully we should see the third movie focus on Shuri's Black Panther once again. And speaking of phenomenal performances here, guys, Angela Bassett. Let's talk about it. Angela Bassett doing, once again, the actor. The actor. And honestly, I should have suspected something was up, because of course, whenever you have a side character who all of a sudden becomes very important and very central to the story, of course it's a setup for them dying. Of course it is. Of course it's foreshadowing. But I was just so in love with Queen Ramonda. I was just so in love with Angela Bassett's portrayal of this character. She came alive. It felt like, actually, yeah, it felt like she had to bring the life, the power, the energy, the authority that was missing because of the deaths of both her husband and her son. That's the energy that we saw there. That's the charisma that we saw there in the leadership of Queen Ramonda. I think Angela Bassett just, again, knocked it out of the park. She was incredible in this film. The pain that she had, that she conveyed here, was palpable. I was so sad that she ended up dying, guys. I don't think that they should have killed her off. I know it made for a great motive for Shuri's character. I also think it was, once again, very clever of Ryan Coogler killing off Queen Ramonda, because it means that Shuri's whole character arc and emotional arc isn't just based off of the death of T'Challa and also the death of Chadwick Boseman. So it prevents this feeling of the film trying to milk that death for all that it's worth. I feel like the fact that Shuri is really triggered by her mother's passing kind of alleviates that problem somewhat. I mean, it's always going to be an iffy situation, but I do think that that storyline definitely helped in trying to alleviate the problem. But still, having said all of that, I'm upset. I think Queen Ramonda was a great figure. It was so nice to have this like matriarch in this civilization, you know, within this franchise overall, and not to mention her drip. Sis was always dressed to the nines, of course, because she's a queen, right? But her outfits were like next level. Even when she had her hair out, like her bright white hair, her Targaryen hair, but she was still dressed to the nines no matter what she was doing. And it was truly inspiring. Now, speaking of Wakanda's new leader, it seems to me from the scene that we got at the end that we could actually be seeing M'Baku become the next king of Wakanda. I don't know if that's the direction that they're going in, but he was there for the whole ceremony where he was supposed to challenge the ruler of Wakanda, but of course Shuri was busy, like she was elsewhere in Haiti, so he didn't really have a challenger. Does that mean that he's like king now? Even though he's not the Black Panther, like can he still be the king, I wonder? I think that would be interesting, especially because no one was calling Shuri the queen when she became Black Panther, so I think the title is up for grabs, and I think M'Baku may have seized the opportunity. And the next character I wanted to go through is Riri Williams, who debuts in this film. Now, she's a character from the comics who actually comes from the like Iron Man side of the world. She's supposed to be the new Iron Man, having gotten a lot of her inspiration and innovation from Tony Stark. And here she's introduced to us as an MIT student, originally from Chicago, who, much like Peter Parker, is able to use like rough and ready materials, all sorts of like spare parts and everything to create something, you know, magical and innovative. She is supposed to be one of the smartest characters in Marvel, you know, in the whole Marvel cinematic universe and also comic book universe. Now, that's all well and good. I think they incorporated the character really well into this storyline. The fact that she was the scientist behind this new machine that's able to detect vibranium. The fact that she didn't even do it intentionally. She was like, listen, it was supposed to be a homework assignment that I got paid for. Like, that was also quite crazy. But again, it's just to emphasize how clever this character is and to set her up for her own Disney Plus show coming next year called Ironheart. But what really stuck out to me was the contrast in personalities that we saw between Riri and Shuri. I have said this many times here on my channel, okay, but I feel like when it comes to representation, Hollywood is at a different place, in a different era, where the focus isn't just on having one black person per 10 white people in a cast, but instead we've shifted focus to the diversification of representation. That's a phrase that I used to use often here on my channel, but I'm bringing it back for this film because that's exactly what's happening here. We have two black female characters. Okay, we have more than two black female characters in this film. We have quite a few of them actually, but two young black female characters who on the surface of it seem pretty much the same, but because of Ryan Coogler's direction and the way that, you know, each of these actresses have set up these characters, they have very distinct personalities, and that speaks to the differences in personalities, in cultures, in accents even across the black diaspora. I feel like that is great representation. I feel like it's wonderful to see two young black incredibly intelligent characters in this huge franchise who each have their own distinct personalities and traits that audience members can perhaps relate to more. This just means the world to me, guys. Like, it just feels like we're spoiled for choice, whereas in the past we were starving for options. And then when it comes to the rest of this cast, guys, I mean, they're all phenomenal. They all gave everything to their performances in this film, and you can feel that. I mean, you have Denai Guerrera, of course, returning as Okoye, who is just a gift to this franchise. She's a gift to Wakanda, she's a gift to the Dora Milaje, and she's a gift to this franchise, okay? And I hope that Princess Shuri, you know, with the power that she has right now, reinstates Okoye as the general of the Dora Milaje, because I know that the Queen, she was angry and she was upset, okay, at the fact that she had lost Shuri, but I think it's clear to see that Okoye deserves to be the leader of the Dora Milaje, because she is just a phenomenal general and soldier. And of course, as I mentioned, this film gave us the debut of Michaela Coel's Aneka, who I love. Listen, I'm a huge Michaela Coel fan. You guys should already know. You guys should already know, okay? And my one critique was that she wasn't in it enough. Truly, like, where was she? I was promised Michaela Coel and I was given very little of her. Don't do this to me, Marvel. And also, it was shown that she is a queer character. Aneka is in a relationship with Ayo, who I believe is like the general of the Dora Milaje now. And that was cute. You know, it's nice to have that LGBTQ representation, especially in a film that depicts the Black community. But it was still Disney. So it still gave very, you know, one big gay moment. So that sort of vibe that we got from like Beauty and the Beast, right, back in the day. And then we also had the return of the true villains, and that was the CIA. Okay, with the agents being portrayed by Martin Freeman and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who apparently these two characters were married. Okay, like that's some information that we didn't know before, but their scenes were fun. It definitely helps build some of the other corners of the MCU, like we have the Thunderbolts coming along, where Valentina is likely to be a key player in assembling that team. And of course, it's always great to see Martin Freeman return as Everett Ross, who's kind of the, you know, middle ground between the CIA and Wakanda. He's still on the bad side, like he's still the CIA, okay, but you know, he's one of the good guys, like he's, you know, he's a friendly CIA agent. We love him. And then of course you had the return of Michael B. Jordan's Eric Killmonger. Seeing Eric Killmonger was great, even if it was in the afterlife, and even if he is technically the devil in this scenario. And the fact that he's like sitting on the throne as well, like the audacity, sir, get off that chair. Michael B. Jordan is excellent in this role, and a part of me does regret the fact that they killed him off in the first film, because Killmonger was just such a great villain, guys. Such a great villain. One of the best that Marvel ever produced. And finally, we need to talk about the mid-credits scene. This is when I was just bawling. Like, this is when I was just crying, snot coming down the nose, tears in the eyes. Like, it was a disaster. With Rihanna's new song as the backtrack to my tears. Like, it was just a mess. But yeah, you get the scene where Shuri goes to Haiti and she finally does the tradition. She finally burns her clothes from her mourning period to signify the end of mourning. And then she is also introduced to none other than baby T'Challa. It turns out that T'Challa had a son with Nakia, and he's about 6 years old, and he could potentially be the next T'Challa in the franchise. And I just think that was such a beautiful moment. I mean, I didn't really hear what they were saying because of my I'm telling you, everyone in the cinema was bawling. Like, I'm sorry. They had literally just shown us a montage of Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa, and they expected us to pay attention to anything that came after. Like, sorry, but I was literally in tears. I was literally crying so much, just choking up. So I barely understood what was going on screen in the mid-credits scene. But I just think, first of all, the kid that plays baby T'Challa is so beautiful and so adorable. Oh, and the dimples, stop it. They chose the perfect cute little kid that they could find to make him baby T'Challa. He's just magnificent. And the idea that, you know, T'Challa's legacy will live on through his son and his sister, let's not forget, I think is just a beautiful sentiment to end this film on. And in a way, as my brother pointed out, I'll give him some credit, but this film started and ended with T'Challa, and I think that is just such a beautiful tribute to not only the character in the MCU, but the actor who portrayed him. And so guys, with all of that being said, whew, it's been a long one. I'm going to be giving Black Panther Wakanda Forever an 8.5 out of 10. So that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Black Panther Wakanda Forever, it's time for you guys to let me know. Sound off in the comments, guys. I would love to hear your thoughts on this film. It really touched me to my very core, and I would just love to hear what you you guys thought of it. So please share your thoughts down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially this one because it's long. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.